I'm Elaine Fisher, a member of the Jane Addams AAUW branch. And just a few tips. The best way to join the webinar is via the internet using your computer, laptop, or smartphone. Your device needs to be capable of audio, for example, computer speakers or headphones. If you don't hear the audio, you can dial in for the audio portion. And you see the phone number on the screen. After you connect, you will be asked for the access code, which is the next line. We want to begin by thanking AAUW Illinois for granting us funds to use the webinar service. AAUW stands for the American Association of University Women, and our mission is equity for women and girls. We urge you to consider joining the AAUW Jane Addams branch, and if you're already a member of another branch, our dues are only $10. If you're not a member, we can answer those questions because we will be using the chat box for all of your questions. So find the chat box. You may have already typed in an answer to our first question, but at the end of the webinar, we will be saving time to answer all the questions. So whether it's about the webinar or about membership, just type your questions into the chat box. It's at the bottom of the GoToMeeting little strip. It probably is on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, we will record the webinar and post the recording on the Jane Addams branch website. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Marianne Cook. Marianne serves as principal at Slalom Consulting, focused on emerging technology, organization design, and workforce development. Formerly, Marianne served as the Chief Strategy Officer, Innovation and Technology for the state of Illinois, working for the governor, where she led the state to create a vision and roadmap for a smart state powered by artificial intelligence and big data technologies. Illinois is the first state in the United States to have developed such a vision. And now I'd like to turn the webinar over to our speaker, Marianne Cook. And we'll be switching to Marianne's slides.
Let's see if I can do this. Hello there. All right. Do people see? Hang on a second here.
Good.
You can see my slides?
We can see them now.
All right, fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for including me with this group to talk about, I think, an incredibly important topic. It's something I'm very excited about. From my perspective, I think we're living through the most extraordinary and exciting times in human history. During our lifetime, we are about to see a transformation of how we operate as people, how we function in our society, and how we work and work together. We really are, I think, at center stage of a massive and accelerating transformation in the way we work. There's emerging technology. In the introduction, you've heard that I've worked with artificial intelligence. I also work with blockchain and some other things. And this is, when you think about big data and this technology all coming together to empower human capabilities, but on the other hand, also to replace humans and our tasks and jobs. So it can be a little unnerving, I think, at times. You have new business models that are upending old ones. The competition for talent is fierce and growing. So there's just incredible implications for our society, economy, government, corporations, and the individual at a time when leaders are already grappling with unprecedented disruption. Now, it's not the first time we've been through something like this. These global economic fundamental transformations occur as a result of disruptive technologies creating enormous efficiencies. Now, what does enormous efficiencies mean? usually less people. So you don't need so many people to do things anymore. And like I said, that's nothing new. It started with the agricultural economy thousands of years ago. We needed less farmers. The industrial economy 200 years ago, the information economy, etc. So this is part of a progression that we're seeing. And the what you have on your screen right now is really the table of contents or the outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about these 5 megatrends that you see on the left. I'm going to go through them one by one, and then I'm going to say, okay, now, what does that mean? What are the implications for the economy, society, organizations, governments, and you as individuals? And I will tell you that where all these come together is where the jobs of the future are going to be, in my opinion. So let's take a look. First megatrend, convergence and acceleration of technology. Now, this is a well-known picture. Take a look at it. And there's a little something weird going on in the upper left-hand corner. That's actually a frog that got blown out of the Floridian swamp when the rocket ship blasted off. So I thought that was a good metaphor or symbol for what's going on with technology. Technology, I thought a rocket ship was a great symbol of that. You know, it is itself an incredible symphony of technology, and you know, it's blasting off, going off into the future, into space. But at the same time, look at that poor frog. He was minding his own business and he got blown away. So you don't want to be the frog. That's probably the biggest message of the entire talk, is don't be the frog. So right now we're at a place where you have this convergence of rapidly innovating technologies, and I'll put a couple of those up on the screen in a minute. And it's happening faster and faster. Change used to be linear and local, and now it's gone exponential and global. So what does that mean? The difference between linear and exponential, if you were to take 30 steps, imagine, you know, wherever you're sitting right now, if you stood up and took 30 steps, you might have to walk through a wall or two, but, you know, imagine how far you would get. That's linear. If you were to do it exponentially, you would actually walk around the globe 26 times. So that gives you an idea of what I mean by the difference between linear and exponential. And you see that. I picked a hometown example of Sears here about how disruptive it can be. Sears in 2006 was their value was $14 billion. Today they're bankrupt. Amazon 2006 was worth $17 billion, roughly comparable, and now it's over $1 trillion. So you can see how these disruptive technologies are impacting things. Now, I will tell you, part of Sears' issue was the change in technology, a lot of management missteps, but also, we'll talk about this in a second, or a couple slides, the disappearance of the middle class in the United States. That's Sears' target market. So again, when we talk about convergence, it's multiple things coming together at once. And so that was one of many issues with Sears. And I always talk about artificial intelligence because people are worried about that. And there's good reason to be worried about that. And it's expected to be a huge industry over time. Now, on the upside, technology it raises the quality of our work. It makes the world safer, more productive. Our lifespans are increasing. Our living standards are up. Literacy is up. There's all kinds of great things going on. And another thing is it's making knowledge available to everyone, everywhere. It is the first time in human history that all of our knowledge will be available to everyone. So you're talking about 3 billion new brains connecting and contributing creativity and innovation across the globe. That also means more competition, of course. So let me just go to the next slide. These are just a few of the technologies that are converging, that are coming together. Something called Moore's Law, I'm sure many of you have heard before, which is processing power and speed is doubling every 12 to 18, 24 months. That's been going on for quite a while. So this Moore's Law concept, people have been talking about it for years, and then I came across a really interesting statistic. It says, Moore's Law means your computers get faster. The number of transistors, the speed of the transistor, the processing power of your computer chips is doubling about every year. Again, if you think about that, that means over the past 47, 48 years that Moore's Law has been recognized, is shown to be working. That's a 27 billion-fold improvement in computing power. These numbers are huge. That is amazing. But they all come together. They all feed off of each other. They all have impact across all of these. And I don't have time to explain all of those, but if you're read it all or aware of what's going on, you've heard of some of these things, and they're pretty phenomenal. Now, the next trend is around changing demographics. So technology is extending our lives. Lifespans are getting longer. Medicine, hygiene, food, everything is improving. And sometimes it's interesting because not only, let's say, is medicine improving and medical knowledge improving, but if you think about someone who traditionally doesn't have access to some of the things that all of us on this call take for granted, many times they do have a smartphone that gets them information that then helps them heal, helps them become, use hygiene, helps them understand what food that they should or should not be eating. So it's sometimes not even just access to the high-tech stuff. It's sometimes just the knowledge, as I said before. Again, higher literacy rates, lower death rates. The other side of that is what's good for the individual stresses society, and then that can drive more automation, right? So you have people who are living longer. I'll give my father as a great example. He's 95, and about 2-3 months ago, he took the whole family skydiving. I'm not kidding you. And he took me indoor skydiving. So this is great. I love that my father is living a long and healthy life. Our society wasn't really built for that, though. And so how do we compensate for that? It's more automation. So we can see how these things sort of build on each other. It also represents a huge marketing opportunity to help people become, enjoy their longer life. From a workplace perspective, we're looking at having 5 generations in the workforce at this point. There's more diversity in age, gender, race, location across the globe, more team-based work, etc. So the demographics absolutely are changing. And you can see that, there's just some, you can see these average numbers and how they've moved over time from, and these are some pretty big leaps over a pretty short time frame. As the growth rate is declining, as population grows, there is some interesting skills, jobs, and location mismatches globally. In some areas, 30 to 45% of the working population is underutilized, either unemployed, inactive, or underemployed, and that's a big problem with the young, and it can drive a lot of destabilizing factors in a society when you have that. So they don't always match, and that limits income earning opportunities for many. The shortage of a human workforce in a number of the rapidly aging economies will drive more of that automation, more productivity enhancements, and changes to how we work. Now, cross-border migration fills some of those gaps, but it can create tensions, as we know and are living through right now. So as global connectivity continues to rise, this will begin to be mitigated to some degree, but that actually does bring us to our next topic. I have a funny quote that I love about the aging market. It's from Edie Weiner, who is a futurist, and she says, as we age, we may lose a little hair, and the market will respond to that by creating products and services. And we may lose a little sex function, and the market will respond to that. And Elastic will take care of the rest. So I guess that's a stock tip to invest in Spanx. All right, so that takes us to our next trend, which is this mass migration to cities. The future absolutely is urban. Millions are migrating to cities, and digital systems will become pervasive within them. It's a perfect example of that growth going from linear and local to exponential and global, by the way. And China is always held up as the example here because they are experiencing the largest mass migration in human history, with 500 million people moving to cities in the past 3 decades. 500 million people have moved from the countryside into cities in just 30 years. There are now over 100 cities in China with populations greater than 1 million, and Chinese urban planners are actively working to connect those into megacities in order to distribute services and traffic. So within a few decades, we'll have 80% of the world's population will live in these massive interconnected cities. And cities themselves are being transformed by smart technologies, changing how you can manage public services and safety, but you still have to balance personal privacy and security. And one of the things to think about is that cities aren't just places where we live. They're really about our humanity and our health. They represent so much more than just building structures. So being thoughtful about how we grow our cities is important. Cities, there's some interesting, my graph shows how the urban populations are changing, and you will see that, and it's already happening now, that cities will compete for talent, particularly the kind of talent that I would call digital nomad, which means you can work remotely and do anywhere. There's been some really interesting things in the United States where particular states or cities have said, I will pay you money, digital nomad, if you will come and live in my state. So Maine did that, and another state did that. Maybe it was Oklahoma. Said, we'll give you $10,000 if, understanding that you don't have a job here, but if you live here, that's good for our economy, so we'll give you $10,000 to live here. So you're going to see more competition, cities competing against other cities in this war for talent that I talked about. More people will work remotely, and that will become possible. So again, all of this points to the need to be more proactive about our planning, because there can be problems if we aren't. Now, the next trend is how the power really is shifting from the west to the east. Really, a new global economic order is emerging to replace the one that existed since the end of World War II that the United States had set up. Multilateral trade agreements and institutions that were dominated by the U.S. are now deteriorating as the U.S. is stepping back from its position as a world leader, and China and Russia are absolutely stepping up. China particularly in terms of establishing these trade agreements and institutions. And also the US dollar is losing its position as the world's reserve currency. So it means that things are going to be, for the foreseeable future, the global economy will be defined by more complex and continuously shifting set of economic relationships. Will still be interconnected, increasingly interconnected, but the U.S. will no longer be able to set the rules for the whole world. Rapidly developing nations that attract investment, are business friendly, improve their education systems are going to come out ahead. Other countries, maybe not so much. So you can see an interesting chart here that points to how power as measured in GDP, I understand that's not the only way to measure it, how that is changing over time. So my final trend before we move into implications is around climate change. It's already here. We're all freezing over here. The polar vortex issue that we're having here in the Chicago area is a direct result, climatologists say, of climate change. So when you have hurricanes on one coast and massive fires on the other coast, and a polar vortex coming from the top, and who knows what coming from the bottom, I think we should all admit that it's already here. So I'm hoping we can find a way for technology to help change that, but we've got Mother Nature is bigger than all of us. Now, what that means, actually, the implications might be surprising in terms of the impact to human beings. So the World Health Organization predicts an additional 250,000 deaths will happen per year after 2030 due to climate change. It's estimated that global productivity decline will be about $2 trillion by 2030, and there will be an increasing demand for energy of 50% and water of 40% by 2030. Now that last one, I would say, is incredibly serious. But being the techno-optimist that I am, that is one area I think where if we play our cards right, we can help mitigate some of that. By that I mean the actual cost of energy is dropping significantly. And when energy gets close to free, it becomes very easy for you to create fresh water. Now, one of the issues, of course, is that not everybody's going to have access to that. But these are interesting implications for our future. Now, there are some massive infrastructure projects. As a matter of fact, if you were to Google mega projects, you'll see some big projects that are going on. Here in Chicago, it is estimated that, as you can see already, we'll have wilder swings in our weather. We have this polar vortex right now that plunges us low. We'll also have more heat in the summer, and we will have more rain, a lot more precipitation. So that means that there's going to be, like I said, some massive infrastructure projects coming on board, and a lot of work and opportunity in the area of alternative energy. I found this interesting statistic. There's a website called Indeed.com where a lot of jobs are posted, et cetera, and they said for the energy sector, it's gone in the last 3 years from 33% to 52% of all UK energy postings have gone to alternative energy related jobs. So alternative energy jobs, let me just recap that, have gone from 33% of the total jobs posted to 52% of the jobs posted in the last 3 years. That's a pretty big climb. So it's interesting when you think about the future. I talked about how food and water demand are up, energy costs are dropping, population growth rate is dropping, and because of climate change, the Arctic becomes a shipping lane. Siberia will become one of the bread baskets of the future because of that. As I said, the majority of people live in cities, and that creates a whole different future of food and agriculture. The world is going to need to boost food production by 70% over the next few decades to feed anywhere from 9 to 11 billion people, and make sure there's enough usable water. We're even seeing that now. I work with some people in Cape Town, South Africa, and they have had significant water problems, and could be potentially the first city on the planet to run out of water. I actually was just on the phone with them on a business call this morning. So, the graphic I put up there is actually Detroit, and because that can be a model. They're getting to be very well known for their art community, for their urban farming, and for their food culture. So Detroit is experiencing an upswing at this point. And when you think about the future of food, et cetera, think about what would happen if we looked at all of the degraded and abandoned lands in the world as really a blank canvas. And you can see on that map in Detroit, we all know Detroit's story, its rise and its fall. A lot of abandoned buildings, a lot of empty lots. Well, they're saying, okay, let's see if that can't be an asset instead of a liability. And if we imagine a future where much of our food is grown indoors, now interestingly, in these vertical farms or converted warehouses, or hey, in the future, maybe in our own refrigerators to match our own nutritional requirements, we can see some significant shifts. And again, to bring it home to the Chicago community, the nation's largest indoor farm is actually in Bedford Park, Illinois, which is right outside of Chicago, kind of close to 55 and 294. I'm hoping to get a tour of that soon. I'm excited about that. But from a smart ag perspective, you think about, well, what could the job titles of the future be? So it's kind of fun if you're ever curious to Google job titles of the future around particular areas, and I did that around agriculture, and vertical farming is already here, as I said, and some massive investments have been made in that. Food printing specialist. NASA is actually working on being able to print food for astronauts in space. Food waste architect. Now, food waste is really interesting. Over 1 billion tons of food per year, that's about 1/3 of the food that is created, is never consumed. I can think about what happens in my own refrigerator. A lot of food gets thrown out when it really shouldn't. But there's an opportunity to do that better. And new technologies allowing suppliers in the food chain to to post alerts about excess food or about to be expired food so it can be dealt with more efficiently, to food banks and soup kitchens. In fact, there's an app that has enabled about 700,000 pounds of unused food in San Francisco to be delivered to about 500,000 homeless people, which is fantastic. And some students have created a company called FOPO that takes surplus or expiring food and spray dries it to extend its life and use it for disaster relief or to help those without food. So you can see how technology is making a difference. And precision agriculture is something I learned about while I was at the state of Illinois. Farmers can precisely know every inch of the fields that they're farming, so you don't have to put pesticides on everything. You could put it on just the area that needs it. You don't have to water all of the acres. You could just figure out where it needs. So you can think about how that can save a lot of water and get some pesticides out of the system. In fact, there are experimental underwater greenhouses off the coast of Italy. There's just a lot of interesting things going on in this area. It's interesting that it's one of the oldest professions, and there's a lot of people who are interested in that right now. So as promised, I went through the 5 megatrends. Now I'm going to go over the 5 implications, and always be thinking where there's overlap and connection, that's where the jobs will be. So very quickly, big thing is, of course, the economy. Let me just tell you, there's a famous story about Henry Ford II, not the first, but the second, and Walter Reuther, who's the legendary head of the United Auto Workers Union. They were jointly touring a recently automated plant, and the CEO was taunting the labor leader by asking, "Hey, Walter, how are you going to get these robots to pay your union dues?" But Reuther comes right back to Ford and asking, "Henry, how are you going to get them to buy your cars?" And that's a key point, isn't it? Because it captures a key concern about the ultimate impact of widespread automation, that workers are also consumers, and they rely on their wages to purchase services produced by the economy. So, when you look at it, perhaps more than any other sector, the automotive industry has showcased this dual role. When the original Henry Ford ramped up production of the Model T in 1914, he famously doubled wages to $5 a day so his workers could buy the cars. And that really, from that genesis, the rise of the automotive industry, it was linked to the creation of a massive middle class. And there's evidence that this symbiosis between rising incomes and broad-based consumer demand is now unwinding. 70% of our economy is driven by consumer spending. And so what's the impact of mass automation on that? When you look at about 5 million U.S. factory jobs have gone between the year 2000 and 2010, 5 million U.S. factory jobs have gone, but over 80% of that, almost 90% of it, was due to automation. So it's not so much the factories leaving for other places, it's actually automation that's driving that. So while technology, it replaces jobs, it destroys some jobs, but it also creates jobs as well. And these are some interesting statistics that you see on the slide there, that in France there was a study that was done in 2011 by McKinsey in Paris, and they said in the past 15 years from 2011, 500,000 jobs were destroyed, but 1.2 million were created. And in the UK, there was a similar study that said between 2001 and 2015, technology contributed to the loss of about 800,000 jobs, but to the creation of 3.5 million jobs. These are hard statistics to gather, but directionally they're saying there's some good trade-off there. Now, any sort of job loss is traumatic, but they're saying there's some good job creation as well. My question I always have to myself is that going to be true this time around? You'll see a lot of statistics all over the map on this in terms of how the jobs are going to change and what are going to be created. And don't worry about it, we've been through this before. And the other side is, oh, but this is the apocalypse, it's something different. You can see by 2030, I have some statistics there that from another source. I literally can find strong arguments on either end. So that's why I have at the top job destruction and creation looks positive. Somebody else is saying, hey, it's not going to be so good. But again, what's the impact to our economy? Consumerism, you're seeing actually a shift amongst young people towards minimalism, to not buying so much. Young people don't so much, and there's actually a very good reason for that, is that wages have been flat or declining if you take out the cost of living. A lot of young people are carrying a lot of debt, etc. I always love these articles, that was sarcasm, by the way, where they say, oh, the millennials are killing this or killing that by not buying so much beer, they're killing the beer industry or whatever. It's like, well, no, actually, they're acting rationally given their financial constraints. But when you take a look at consumerism itself, when you think about, there's now, many of you may have heard of Internet of Things and how there are sensors that are in our roads and on our lights and in our cars and all over the place, but they're also in the future going to be more and more in us. We are going to be part of the system, and by there's things called wearables. You may have seen those already, but there's also ingestibles, and some people are getting things implanted in themselves. It's estimated by 2030 there'll be about 500 billion devices and 100 trillion sensors out of the market. So you're going to have a hyper-connected economy, hyper-connected people, workplace, and hyper-connected stores. So it's estimated that the amount of data doubles every 8 months, and people will be more and more quantified. We'll have smart appliances, fridges, pantries, and packaging, virtual personal assistants that can automate these purchases, and there's even people that believe that, we're seeing this already, that drones and automated vehicles are going to be doing more delivery, and people also propose there'll be more personal manufacturing. Homes will have 3D printers, and that a lot of our consumables can be printed at home. Given how cold it is, actually that sounds very attractive to me right now. But we're also seeing shopping as a destination. If you can get everything online, that's one thing, but we as people, we are like bees that need a hive. We need social interaction. So shopping can become more of an experience. One of my clients actually owns a lot of the high-end malls, and they work very aggressively to create them as destinations for people to go to. The focus on the environment is interesting in light of this. People, on the other hand, in terms of going to the luxury sort of end, at the other end, there is what's called the circular economy, and you'll see that people are reusing things. There are now tool libraries. I think somebody needs to make sure that their mute is on. I'm hearing a little chatter in the back, a little noise in the background. But tool libraries, the average person, when they, someone like me who's not a professional carpenter or something, may go and buy a drill. For the common person like me, that drill actually gets used over the course of its lifetime and mine, less than 30 minutes. So people are creating these tool libraries. They are also creating toy libraries. Finland and Sweden have giant supermarkets that only stock secondhand goods. So in Europe and increasingly in the United States, there are bulk buying stores that are packageless. There's one right here in Oak Park. It's called Sweet Beets. I've been there. My kid took me there, and I thought it was great. So you have to bring whatever wrapping or bags you need to buy in bulk. We actually bring mason jars to fill. So I find all of that to be absolutely fascinating. So other implications for the economy, and I'm checking the time, so I may have to speed up just a smidge here. But more and more, we're seeing this gig economy. I talked a little bit about the circular economy. Sharing economy, what does that mean? That means Uber, right? That means I have a car, I'm going to share it with others. I have tools, I'm going to share them with others. It really is interesting because it really changes how we think about purchasing things, which again has that impact on our consumer economy. So there's a lot of statistics on this as well. According to Oxford Internet Institute, talent platforms that allow you to find gig workers, the use of them increased by large corporations, increased 26% in 2017. You can see some interesting statistics I have on the bottom half of the slide there. I talk about the 26% uptick. Interestingly, 55% of freelancers increased their skill sets in the last 6 months, whereas only 30% of permanent employees have done the same thing. So you can see that aggressive need to keep your skill set up to date. The 41% of the U.S. workforce has some sort of side hustle, side gig, as people talk about. It can be any number of things, whether you're creating crafts and selling them to your friends, or Uber, or anything like that. So it's one of the fastest growing workforce segments, and we're just seeing more and more people move into that. Let me keep moving here. So what's the implications then for our society? Technology is becoming an invisible extension of the self. Just like electricity, today's emerging technology will be embedded and invisible to us in the future. You don't think about electricity in your home right now. It's embedded, it's invisible to us, and it's right there. So years from now, we won't be thinking about the mechanics of it or be in awe of it. It'll just be part of our lives and our society. I talked about Uber and Lyft before. The popularity of these services are paving the way and creating platforms for not just connecting riders with cars or vacationers with places to stay or whatever, vulnerable populations with critical services even. They are really coordinating technologies and resetting expectations about the ownership of fixed assets. And it really makes us think of, what is a job? Technology as an extension. I have an example there of elder care. Relatives can use lightweight, affordable home robots to cultivate what's called co-presence, and depend on coordinating platforms to schedule and monitor caregiving services on demand. So again, is work just a place for transactions, or is it really for belonging? It is very clearly a place where we get our identity, where we feel connection to others, where we have a sense of purpose and structure. And the identity piece is really true for Americans, more so than a lot of other cultures. A lot of times, the first time we meet people, it's like, well, what do you do for a living? We identify people by their jobs, and that's why job loss is so tough for a lot of people. So over time, we will see these transformations taking place, and people will develop, deeper relationships. It really is a great opportunity, though, to solve some big problems. What I have there on the slide, there's a great organization I'm actually involved with called Singularity University that issues these grand global impact challenges and says, hey, these technologies are out there. Come to us and we'll give you money and support if you can identify ways to use that technology to provide solutions in one of these areas that you see there: disaster resilience, energy, etc. And, is it a solution that can be used by over 1 billion people? So they're really swinging for the fences on this, giving people financial and entrepreneurial support in order to take these technologies and do something good for them. So we really can solve some of our more massive societal problems with technology. So I don't mean to be doom and gloom about it. It does impact our government, though. When you think about the future, there will be more entrepreneurs. So it's important for government to make it easier, really, to launch and exit a business by changing business formation and bankruptcy rules, and to build on current entrepreneur support programs. There's a lot of support programs out there that let's make sure that they're connected and leveraged appropriately. A lot of innovation programs out there. We need to fix our immigration policies and get our talent shortfalls addressed and get new people integrated well. We need to work better in the government around creating these talent ecosystems to establish a framework to help develop talent, because it's all about having those skills that the workforce needs. I am a strategic advisor for the Chicago Blockchain Center, and still have my connections with the state of Illinois, and I've been working with them to see what we can do to foster a blockchain-related ecosystem, putting together academicians and students and employers and government and training programs and all kinds of different things, bringing them together to try to create more jobs and businesses around blockchain, just as one example of many. So government can, create more incentives. One of the things to keep in mind is, it again hits on that talent ecosystem thing, is the need to be constantly learning. I don't need to tell that to the people on the phone. You are learning. You decided to take your evening and spend it learning, and people need to constantly be pushing forward on that. It's anticipated in the future the average lifespan of a skill is going to decrease to 5 years. People are going to have to refresh their skill sets, 6, 7, 8 times during their careers. So that's something that the government can very much support. And it's also important to ensure inclusivity and rethink safety nets. Right now our healthcare is tied to our jobs, and we are in a position right now where jobs are becoming shorter and shorter and less permanent. So does that make sense going forward? People are going to need support as work, it just evolves at a higher rate of change. People are going to need assistance transitioning, and there's a lot of best practices out there on that. So a lot of great things can happen here in terms of reimagining education. Some interesting best practices there. Make sure that there's that interaction with the entrepreneurial community. There's the opportunity to invest in these bigger infrastructure projects. So climate change, as I've said before, urbanization is going to drive these massive projects. We're seeing them all over the world. Here in Chicago, climate change is expected to drive larger rainfalls, and the Great Lakes are going to get greater. South Florida, we're seeing they're rebuilding their water processing systems higher in anticipation for higher sea levels. You're going to see highway changes, all kinds of things. So government in creating these infrastructure projects can also drive a lot of job growth. And the digital infrastructure needs to be built out as well. And one of the things government needs to help regulate is the issue of data privacy and intellectual property protection. So it's not just about, when I say infrastructure projects, yes, it's the concrete and steel, but it's also around the privacy of the citizen while performing public services. So for government, I thought there's a really interesting, some interesting examples of things that are going on there. Estonia, which I actually hope to be visiting in a couple of weeks. I'm going on a business trip to Helsinki and hope to pop over to Estonia. When they spun out, to say it nicely, of the Soviet Union, they had an opportunity to really recreate government, and they recreated a digital government. And you can see some statistics there about how they do things and what the results of those are. Very, very digitized government. I read a lot about these sorts of things, and they are repeatedly held up as a model. Finland, as I said, I'm going to be going there in a few weeks. They are just wrapping up a UBI experiment. Now, UBI is Universal Basic Income. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. It's guaranteeing people a certain level of money that does not lift them out of poverty, but if they work at a minimum wage, that will get them out of poverty. So it's not so much a hammock, as people say. It's more of a safety net, acknowledging the income inequality that's going on right now. So while I'm in Finland, I'm going to ask them about how that experiment went. They have got incredibly highly ranked education. They've invested in that. They had a big problem in infant mortality about 15 years ago, and they said, that's just not going to stand. They put a lot of effort into that. Every Finnish mother gets what's called a baby box with clothing, medical supplies, and bedding in a box that's also a bed. Finnish fathers spend more time with their kids than the mothers do. There's a huge push on getting men involved with their children. And I put the National Jealousy Day in just because I think it's interesting. They publish the taxable income of all of their citizens on this one particular day. So I just think that's interesting. It just puts in your face if there's income inequality, right? So it's a very interesting approach, and I'm glad to be going over there to talk to them about how exactly that works. Now, we also have what's the implications for our organizations? And these overlap with some of the things I've talked about before. You know, when you think about any emerging technologies impact, it's profitability and efficiency also, but it's also this talent issue comes up again and again and again. Corporations are going to need to embed themselves in more talent ecosystems, work with government, have university partnerships. There's some interesting things there. Drive nano degrees and online education, working with entrepreneurs, et cetera. In fact, organizations are going to really foster lifelong learning. AT&T is held up in the literature quite a bit as a good example of a company that's doing it smartly. They say you're going to get so much money to spend with a particular organization. I believe it's tied particularly to an organization. There's online organizations like Coursera and Udemy. I believe it's Udemy is the one that they've worked with, or it might be Udacity, where they went to, let's say it's Udacity, which is an online education provider, and they said to Udacity, based on our business strategy, we need to build these certain skills. We're going to work with you to create classes and a curriculum for our employees. Then the employees go and they take those classes and they're paid for. The employee is expected to do it on their own nickel, but it's customized to what AT&T needs. It takes into account what the employee needs to learn. So that's frequently held up as a model. So there needs to be, you know, there's some flexibility and experimentation with gig models. Work itself needs to be redesigned. Workforce planning, development, recruiting, everything needs to be rethought from an organization perspective. You know, even the concept of retirement. You know, is it an all or nothing thing? It shouldn't be. People have, you know, people as they get further in their career still have a lot to contribute. Sometimes they are more than happy to walk out the door. Other times, hey, could it be part-time? Does it have to be 60 hours a week? So there needs to be some rethinking of retirement itself. And then my bottom bullet is, you know, all of this alludes to us becoming more and more connected, but that also represents risk. Connection equals risk. So some of the key skills or competencies organizations will need to have is, you know, to master cybersecurity and risk management itself. So from an organization perspective, you can see some of the stats here around around how they are using contingency workers or consultants, et and more and more are doing that. There is some interesting work around how there's over time there's going to be less face-to-face meetings, different mixes of talent, that you're going to have to manage a workforce that's a mixture of people who are full-time, people who are part-time, people who are contingent, and robots and artificial intelligence. So it's not going to be an easy thing to do. The concept there, the second bullet around exponential organizations, is there's been some interesting studies done about those organizations that are doing well, and they tend to have to do a certain set of things. They tend to use collaborative technologies, existing accelerating technologies. They have scalable processes. They distribute authority. A lot of different things. I don't mean to read them off to you, but an interesting one, first of all, is multidisciplinary teams. The second one is I think, very interesting shift in that those that are successful work to have some sort of massive societal greater purpose about themselves. So when you think about companies like Google, etc., Patagonia, they try to tie themselves to doing something good for society. And when this is incredibly important to young people, by the way, 80% of millennials say that's important to them. Companies that have that sort of massive societal good purpose, whether it's in their vision statement or they support, the company I work for, Slalom, has a foundation arm, and people within the company can work on that and work on philanthropic things. But when a company has that sort of purpose, its retention rate is 3 times higher than those that don't. They are 1.4 times more engaged, And interestingly, 89% of clients believe that a purpose-driven company will deliver the highest quality products and services. So it's a win-win. And when you think about these purpose and social causes, think about what just happened recently. When the United States stepped back from the Paris Accords, Google, Apple, Facebook, Campbell's Soup, Timberland, they all agreed to stay in the Paris Accords after the U.S. pulled out. Dick's Sporting Goods stopped selling guns in response to the pressure after the Parkland shooting, and in fact benefited from that. So it's interesting to see these changes, how they manifest themselves within organizations. Clearly, there's a role for the private sector to drive training, get involved with those ecosystems, redesign work for technology and learning, and move beyond process redesign only, but to actively look for ways to enhance machine-human collaboration. People talk about innovation in terms of products and services and innovation of processes. Organizations themselves need to innovate themselves. And the work itself is changing in multiple ways, as I have mentioned. So what does it mean for individuals? Well, you got to be on your game in the new economy. As I mentioned before, there's going to be more your skills lifespan, I guess we can call it, is going to decrease over time. People who are born relatively recently are expected to have not just different jobs, but different careers. And if you look at those numbers, they're really quite incredible. And you have to think, I always think in terms of business terms, right? 15 different houses, that doesn't mean they're going to own the houses. Matter of fact, home ownership is decreasing. Some of the tax benefits have now gone away with the debt load that people are carrying, income levels being flat. Even though profits have gone up in corporations, that has not been shared with labor as it has done statistically in the past. People are going to rent more. So the middle skills jobs, I have some interesting statistics on that. In 1979, 60% of jobs were considered middle skills. In 2015, that's down to 45%. I actually think it's less than that, but 60% down to 45%. So people have to not only learn things, but they have to make sure they're learning the right things and the higher level skills. Now there's something called STEMpathy. Thomas Friedman is a famous writer, so he can make up words, I suppose. But STEM, many of you I'm sure have heard, is science, technology, engineering, and math. And he says if you have those skills and you can merge them with human empathy, the ability to connect with people, then that's where the future is. And he says, in the past, agricultural, industrial revolution, we worked with our hands. Information revolution, we work with our heads, and now it's time to work with our heart, to have that sort of empathy, to tap into the most human capabilities that we have. He was asked in an interview, what's the advice you would give your daughters? I thought it was a great question, and he said, well, first of all, you need to think like an immigrant. You have to hustle. This is an interesting statistic that immigrants are 4 times more likely to become millionaires than native-born people. And that's an interesting statistic. It speaks to hustle, doesn't it? He also said, second piece of advice was to think like an artist, to be creative. What unique thing can you add to what you do? There's something called the Makers Movement. Many of you have heard about that. That basically for the price of a gym membership, you can get space and access to tools, machines that, in the past you might have to own a factory, well now you can have access to just the machine. So how can you add something custom to your work? He said, third, think like an entrepreneur. Are you creating something that the market will reward? Think of yourself would you be profitable? His fourth piece of advice is always be in beta, which means always be experimenting. And then his fifth piece of advice was to always have passion and curiosity and to be learning as much as you can. So for individuals, you got to plan for changes that are going to happen. With technology, you really need to think about some important things as technology is implemented. How do we avoid, I'm going to use artificial intelligence as a great example. How do we avoid embedding and amplifying biases that we have in our artificial intelligence? How do we demonstrate that it's safe? What happens when a machine takes over a process? How does a human take it back if we need to? How does the algorithm underneath artificial intelligence match with our key principles and values? Who are the key constituents that will be affected by this algorithm? And are we talking to them now, getting feedback? And are we planning to do that in the future? So it's important to think strategically about these things, be constantly evolving, constantly learning, constantly skating to where you think the puck is going to be. The gig and sharing economy are an absolute part of our future. I listed a couple places where jobs will definitely be created going forward, and it looks like I'm running out of time. So we are on a journey of incredible progress and opportunity. It's easy to get caught up in the negative news media, the entertainment industry, when you think about the Matrix and the Terminator and think our future is going to be dark. It really continues to feed us information that's negative because that's what we've evolved to pay attention to in order to survive. But really, it's a story of incredible progress and opportunity, and there will be work for people, because in the end, the expenditure of energy for the benefit of ourselves and someone else is absolutely limitless. As I said before, I think the key takeaway from this is to not be that frog, to move forward. Now, I'm going to turn. That concludes the presentation. I'd like to turn it back to my partners here. Do we have time for?
Thank you, Marion. This has been great. And I'm encouraging people to type their questions into the question box.
Well, as they're doing that, would you like me to go quickly through the quiz?
Okay, sure.
Do we have
this
time?
is kind of answering the question, what can an individual do to get ready for this?
Right.
Go ahead.
All right, so I'll keep, so here's a couple of quick things, and just take the quiz in your head. And this is from, I have the source here at the bottom if you want to find out more about that, but do most of your friends know each other? Think about that. The things that you're involved with, your religious organizations, school, organizations like this one, etc. Are they all the same? Are you seeing the same people there? Who do you discuss important matters with, need support from, socialize with? If there needs to be diversity in that group, in gender, age, experience abroad, education, ethnicity. It is key to keep your fingers on the pulse of what's going on out there, and you don't get that by just talking to people just like you. It's like talking to yourself. So, think about how broadly your social circle is. The second quiz, very quickly, is think about, well, what are you known for? And what do you plan to be known for? Think about, well, what am I working on right now? Is it making me learn? Is it provocative and challenging to me? And sleep deprivation doesn't count, by the way. Think about the last 3 months. What have you learned? Who have you met? Number 4, important new additions to my Rolodex. 5, how have I nurtured those relationships? 6, what am I doing that will be resume worthy, that's significant enough to go on a resume? And think backwards. How is my resume different than it was last year? So this is a challenging quiz to make sure that you are continuously learning, you are exposing yourself to new people and new ideas and new opportunities. So do we have any questions?
Well, one thing I want to remind people, we will be posting the slides and the recording. So don't worry about writing all these down.
Good catch there.
Now, one question I had when I was listening to the need for training every 6 months, the need for higher level skills, the current cost of university training seems to be a big barrier to accomplishing that. Do you see that? How do you envision that future conflict?
Well, so the education industry is right now getting disrupted. So I have kids who are in college right now, and I wasn't really paying attention to the cost of college until it got close for them to go, and I was knocked out of my chair. The cost of education has increased at a much higher rate than inflation, and a much higher rate than anybody's wages are increasing. So as a result of that and the high demand, because people want to get educated, you're seeing a lot of free education online. You know, there's where you can take classes, but you don't get the certificate, but you can take it for free. So I actually do that with Coursera, a number of their classes. If you pay the money, you get the certificate. If you don't pay the money, you still get the content. So you can download the content and go through it. So I do that. So you're seeing more nano degrees, small, you know, smaller ahead of the 4 years thing. I actually work for MIT for their online blockchain education. It's a 6-week program. So you're going to see more targeted, specific, high-value kinds of certificate programs, and there is a lot of things you can learn on free. I mean, you can learn a lot just on YouTube if you work at it. Right. But you have to be aggressive about that. And by the way, there's a lot of bad education out there too. So do your homework in terms of researching. But the 4-year degree, it's the cost of that is an absolute inhibitor, and I think people are realizing, particularly in my field, which is technology, if you can do the skill, maybe you don't need the degree. Maybe you just need some certificates.
Right. Okay, we have another question. Denise, you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for your presentation, Marion. It was very informative. I do, however, want to ask, maybe for a best practice suggestion, if all these big challenges are out there, and today, for example, you say big corporations are increasing their usage of the gig workers, and thinking that how technological the education would be, the requirement of education would be going forward, how are we going to ensure that the vast majority of the population who is not going to have these capabilities necessarily are going to be able to be taken care of, short of course, understanding we need to change our current administration and whatnot. But my concern is, are the folks that are developing all this spiffy technology going to take a breath and spend some time to help correct some of the issues that are developing by their mere existence?
So this is the question of the age. I will tell you something a little personal about myself. I actually took in 2 homeless teens and their 2-year-old daughter. Whenever I think about these kind of technology programs and education, I always think of them because they were so incredibly disadvantaged from their very birth. They both grew up in dysfunctional families where they never saw working adults, never saw stable marriages, they never saw, they were physically abused, they had mental health issues, etc. And we as a society need to invest in people like that because, just morally, they are our brothers and sisters. And also just from a straight societal functioning perspective, to have this massive disconnect between these 2 kind of groups of people has resulted in some of the dysfunction that we see today, without naming names, although we all know I could. So we have, as a society, it's interesting because the American point of view or sort of cultural attribute, I travel a lot in the world, and in Europe, there is more of a when we help each other, we all do better. In the United States, it's more of this individualistic sort of cowboy mythology that you have to do it on your own, and the American dream, if you haven't got it, it's your fault, when in fact there are some systemic issues. So you're pointing out a cultural issue, a issue that is key for this point in time, particularly because some people who are disadvantaged or who are feeling left behind have reacted in a way that's not good for all of us, and it's actually not good for them. So I don't have any big solutions to that, except to vote. In terms of corporate,
but don't you feel that the folks who are creating all these wonderful things should not stop and spend some time to consider the ramifications of what they're creating, and hopefully then use their talents and intellect to help with the solutions for those who can't possibly keep up, no matter who is in the White House. I mean, we're a big country population-wise compared to wonderful Sweden and Finland.
Oh, well, listen, should we do that? Absolutely. You know, that goes to a capitalist system, goes to where the money is. Now, when you take a look at Facebook, for example, you know, they have. I tell my kids this. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of people whose full-time job it is to take your youth from you through the phone. I mean, they are creating something that is addictive. They are trading their youth for time on their phone. You know, so Facebook and these big companies, they have philanthropic arms. Is that their main thrust? No, it's not. It's to make money. It's to make it's shareholder value. And that's where you come around to, well, do you want to tell them they have to? Well, that, you know, starts sounding kind of wonky. Well, then, is it the government's responsibility to regulate it, or is it the government's responsibility to work with those companies or other companies to create that? We are in a society that says, I don't want to pay taxes, which is a statement of, I don't want to, in my opinion, I'm going to get very opinionated here, it's a statement of, I don't want to help others if I don't have to. So I think we need to evolve on that. The confluence of things that are happening in American society, it's going to take some real massive will to change. So when the Finns said, we have high infant mortality, we're going to change that, there was a national effort to do that, multi-pronged, helping the mothers, getting the fathers more engaged, etc. Scotland had an incredibly violent society, very violent society. They, as a country, had the will to change that through a multi-pronged approach, and it has dropped drastically. The question is, are we at a point where Americans are going to say, we're going to work together to solve this? And I don't know that we are.